All right, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jake, and I'm excited to be here today presenting the various ways that you can refine your grids by assigning NoData with Surfer. Today, we're going to cover how to assign NoData in the grid data dialog using a polygon boundary, how to assign NoData using a mixed NoData flag, which means inside and outside of multiple polygons, assigning NoData using a convex hole, assigning NoData using an alpha shape, and finally, how to replace a portion of one grid with another grid. Throughout the whole webinar, I will also be sharing some tips to make your model look as professional as possible for that final presentation to your clients. After the discussion of each topic, I will stop for a few minutes to answer any questions. You can send your questions to the webinar host via the Q&A located on the Zoom toolbar at any time. Type in your question, will be sent to the webinar host who will either answer it or forward it to me. And please use the Q&A function rather than the chat or the raise hand feature. This will allow the host to ensure we see all questions in a timely manner. And feel free to send in all your questions. If we don't have time to answer them during the webinar, we will answer them via email once the webinar is complete. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and later this week, we will post the recording along with the data used. We'll send each of you a link when that's posted so that you can test these examples out for yourself. So let's get started by overviewing what assigning NoData is and a few examples of why you might want to do this. Surfer's base programming will automatically grid data into a square extent like this, unless you otherwise specify it. Assigning NoData is how we tell Surfer not to do that. You may not want a square grid because you are hoping to only model a specific area of interest, like a body of water, a specific building in a construction plan, or an oddly shaped geologic feature. I'm going to cover those examples today and more. So let's get started with assigning NoData to this existing grid. And so, like I said, we're going to assign NoData to this yellow and gray contour map that we're looking at now. Overlaid on the contours is a building blueprint, which we'll see the outside border of here, and that's what we're going to use to assign NoData. We also can see our data points that were used to create the contours. They're these red symbols. And looking at these, we can clearly see that despite none of the data points falling outside of this building blueprint, contour data was extrapolated out past the border. And we can crop that unwanted data out by using these polygons that already exist. Before we assign NoData, it's always smart to confirm that the layers you want to use are in the same coordinate space. Surfer will use the coordinates in each file to determine where the border lies and what data to keep or not keep. So it's important that everything aligns. We can view the coordinate system information by clicking on a layer, and from the property manager, selecting the coordinate system tab. And currently for this layer, we do not have a coordinate system set. It says unreferenced local system, but that is totally fine so long as every other layer and the map object also says unreferenced local system. And they do, so we're good to start this process. And to do that, we would click Grids up here in the ribbon. Then here in the Edit section, we would select Assign NoData. By clicking Assign NoData, I open the NoData dialog. And in this dialog, we have the option to choose an input grid, either from our own files by clicking Browse, or from the drop-down menu, we can choose any grid-based map that is already in our project. We can also choose a layer that has polygons to use for assigning that NoData boundary. And we can choose how we want that data to be clipped, whether it is inside, outside, or a mix of both on those polygons. And then finally, we can choose what type of layer our final output is going to be created as. And that is any of our grid-based maps. For this example, we can see that I chose the base vector floor plan layer and it automatically grabbed all 6 of the polygons within that layer. And that's not actually what we want, because we only want the outermost border over here to assign no data outside of. If we use all the polygons, we'll lose some of the data within. And to resolve this and grab only that outermost border, we can use the selected objects only checkbox right here. But first, we're going to have to exit out of the dialog and go select that polygon so we can use it. So I'll go ahead and close out now. And then I'll go ahead and expand the base vector floor plan layer. And I'm pretty sure that this polygon up top is the outermost layer, and I can confirm it by showing and hiding that. So I'll make sure that I have this polygon selected here in the contents window. And I'll go ahead and re-click Grids, Assign NoData. And I will choose the same options. I'll choose the house concentrations grid. I will choose the base vector floor plan. Only this time I'm going to check the selected objects only box. And as you can see, we go down to just 1 polygon total instead of all 6. Now I can just name my new grid. I'll go ahead and call it Blueprint Clip. And I can choose to add it as a new map or to the existing map. And I'll go with the existing. And I want to add it as a contour layer. Then we just got to click OK. Oh, forgot one step. We got to select no data inside or outside. And we know we want no data outside because we're trying to lose the data outside of the floor plan. So now I can go ahead and click OK. And if I turn off the original contour layer, now we can see a nicely clipped inside of the blueprint contour map. And I could very easily copy the color scheme from the original by clicking Copy Properties from the Contents window, pasting it to the original, and bringing this below the floor plan. And now we have this nice professional looking cropped map. Now there's a couple things I could do to make this look even more professional for presenting to my clients. I could add a color scale by clicking on the Levels tab in the Property Manager right here, and then checking the color scale box right here. I could then right-click my color scale, and I could select Rotate and put in a number such as -90, and then drag and resize it into this white space so we have a nice template. I could add a title really quickly directly to my color scale. Once again, from the Property Manager, I would go down to this title section, and here in title text, I could type in what my color scale represents. So I'm going to type in concentrations ppm, click OK. And then we have a lot of labels here on this color scale that is a little bit hard to read. So I could clean that up from the Labels tab of the color scale. I could increase the frequency so that it's not as dense. And I could check Show Max Value so we know what the top of our scale is. And finally, for the color scale, I could change the angle on the labels by just typing in 90. And now it better fits the rotation that we applied earlier. Now, one last thing that I could add so that this looks like a final presentation to my client is I could add the address and my pretend company name and logo down here in this other corner. That's very straightforward to add. We'd click Home, Insert Text, click on the text, click where we want the text to populate, And I could just type in the address of whatever building I was mapping, my company's name. And if I want to reposition that, I could use the select tool here on the ribbon. Let's do some drag and drop. And if I wanted to add my logo next to the text, I could click Insert Graphic, I can choose my logo and resize it down to this corner to remove that white space. And now we have a final map that we could show to our clients. And that's going to wrap up our first example of using a polygon to assign NoData to an existing grid already. Do we have any questions so far? All right, one question I am seeing, can we add a north arrow, a scale, things of that nature, etc.? So yes, you can add a scale. You would select the map object and click here in the map tools, add scale, which, where did that go? So created a scale down here. Since our map is in that unreferenced system, this isn't in our UTMs, but if we did go ahead and set all our mapped UTMs, then the scale would automatically update to UTMs. And then if you wanted to add that north arrow, our north arrow is within Surfer is actually a symbol. So you would add a point from the insert up here, insert a point, and then you would update the symbol to the north arrow right here. And then you could make that larger. We have a couple different options you can use. And you could drag that into the white space as well if you needed to. And if you need to rotate your north arrow, you could use the map tools, or you could do a right click, rotate, put in whatever degree direction you need to show north. Okay, and I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our second example. If anything pops up, feel free to type it in as we go along as well. Okay, so for this next example, we're going to also use that Assign NoData tool, and we're going to use it on the contour map here that we are looking at, which is of a lake that has a couple islands in it. They are right here. And we want to assign NoData to everything outside of the shoreline, which is this lighter blue area here, and while also keeping all the data inside the island borders. And we could assign NoData twice, once assigning outside and then again to get the inside, or we could use that mixed option, which we saw in the dialog earlier, which allows us to do both operations at the same time. The only way to use the mix option is to have the polygon border in the BLN file format. So our first step for this example is going to be making a BLN polygon. A BLN file is a Golden Software proprietary text file that can be used to create a base map, assign NoData, or apply break lines or fault lines while gridding your data. And when a BLN file is used to assign NoData, Surfer looks for that NoData flag for each polygon within the file. And the flag tells Surfer whether to assign NoData inside or outside of the object. 1's going to assign NoData inside, and 0 is going to assign NoData outside. And we're going to create our BLN file from this 2240 Z-level contour line that represents the shore. To isolate this contour line, I'm going to go ahead and select the contours layer in the contents window, then go to the levels tab in the properties. And here I can set a minimum and maximum contour. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set both to 2240. Now, before exporting that polygon, I also need to turn off the labels, because if I try to export it, Surfer will pick up the labels as their own polygons and polylines. And same with the fill. If I don't turn it off, this big fill will be picked up as a polygon. And once both of those things are off, we can still make sure we have the contour layer selected in the contents window, because we're going to use a selected objects only export, which to do so, we would click File, Export. And then if we have this selected objects only box checked down here, I will only grab the contour line that exists here. I won't grab the axes and the additional axes labels. So I'll go ahead and call this 2240, since that's the Z level of this contour line. And I'll just go ahead and click Save. And that is going to open up the export options for BLNs, which has its own BLN export options here. If we weren't planning to do a mixed example, I could choose to assign all of the polygons Surfer recognizes as NoData inside or outside. Since we are going to end up editing the BLN to add our own flags, I'll just leave everything as NoData inside and click OK here. And once that BLN has been created, I can add it to our existing map as a base layer. To do so, I would click Home, Add to Map, Add Layer, Add Base Layer, and I would choose that 2240 BLN. Now, when I look at this, I can see that we got a couple extra artifact polygons down here in the corner. That's because they had the same 2240 Z level. And we're going to want to go ahead and clean those up, because we only want to work with the 3 polygons that are the shoreline and the islands. So to do that, I would expand the base vector layer here so I can see all of the objects. And currently they're all in a polyline format. And I want to change these to a polygon format, which is very easy to do. I could just shift click all of them at once. Then I could do a right click, could scroll down to change to, and I could choose any of these options, but for our purposes, polygon works. After that, I can click on any of these polygon artifacts that I want to get rid of, and I can just click delete on my keyboard and we'll get rid of them. There's still a couple more than just the 3 that we want here. And if I click in the contents window, it will select whichever polygon I'm looking at, so I can figure out where those are, delete those extra ones as well. And now we're down to the 3 polygons that we're going to use to assign those NoData flags. Now what I'm going to do is re-export this BLN so it saves as having those 3 polygons instead of all those polylines. And I'm going to do that because our next step is opening up in opening it up in a worksheet. So I'll just real quick overwrite that BLN file. And then to open it up in a worksheet, I would click File, Open in Worksheet, and select our BLN. When looking at a BLN file in a worksheet, the first object within the file will be your first row. And cell A1 is going to be the number of coordinates in that object. Cell B1 is going to be the NoData flag, which 1 means no data inside and 0 means no data outside. And because of the export options we chose at the start, all the NoData flags in this file are going to be 1 for no data inside. And since we know they are all going to be 1, instead of doing a bunch of scrolling, I'm going to use Control F to find all of the 1s in this worksheet. So here's that first polygon object. Here's that second one, and we can see it has 216 coordinates. And here's that third one, which has 142 coordinates. And then the top one has 1,900-ish. And so we can pretty clearly tell that this top one has the most coordinates, and I can safely assume that that is our largest polygon, our shoreline, which we want to change the NoData flag on so that it assigns no data outside. So I'm going to go ahead and change that now by just changing this 1 to a 0. Then I'll go ahead and do a quick save. And now we can hop back into our map. And I can reload our BLN file so that it will have that mixed data now. And now when I click grids, assign no data, and I start going through this process, I'll set my input grid as the contours layer, and I'll choose our BLN we just created. You can see that Surfer automatically sets the clipping options to mixed, and it recognizes that there's 3 polygons in the file. 2 of them have no data inside and 1 has no data outside. So now all I have to do is go ahead and save this as a new grid. I'm going to go ahead and add it as a contour layer to our existing map. I'll click OK, click OK. And there we have a contour layer that fits within that shoreline, but doesn't encroach into the islands here. I'll go ahead and make this look a little nicer as well. I'll select the contour layer in the contents window. Then I'll go ahead and click levels. I'll click fill contours. And I will choose a blue-white color scheme since it's a water object. And then these contours are also really dense within. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the contour interval. And I could also try and smooth them out a little bit by selecting the General tab. And here in the smoothing, I click high. That doesn't do a lot though. And there are a couple other smoothing options that you could use if that doesn't quite meet your needs. And then if I wanted to maybe add a thicker border around this so that the lines don't look quite so jagged, I could select the base vector layer here in the contents window. I could expand the line properties, and I could increase the width. And that is going to wrap up our mixed flag NoData example. I will go ahead and take any questions that we have on this or the previous one now. All right, one question I'm seeing, can I export the contour line in another data format, such as a SHP? Yes, you can export the contour line as a SHP file if you wanted to. You wouldn't be able to use that SHP file to do the mixed NoData though. You have to use a BLN for that. But if you were just trying to export a single contour line as an SHP, you could definitely do that. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions right now, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next example, which is going to be assigning NoData using a convex hole and an alpha shape. And so what we're looking to do is we're going to try and regrid this raw contour data here, but we're going to use the assign NoData outside of a convex hole option first, and that is found in the grid data dialog. An easy way to imagine what the convex hole feature does is to imagine these red X and Y coordinates here as nails in a board. And if you stretch the rubber band around these nails, that border would mark the edge of the convex hole, and NoData would be assigned to the areas outside of that rubber band. This option keeps Surfer from interpolating the data out into a perfect square, and it honors that perimeter of your data. And for this example, we'll start by opening the Grid Data tool, which is found on the Home tab. Grid Data. And then we're going to go ahead and choose this convex hole.dat dataset that I have for the example. And if you're ever unsure of if your data is, your columns line up properly as an XYZ, we have this view data option. It's very handy if you're working in larger spreadsheets than just the 3 columns here. And I'm not going to change any of the settings. I want to get straight to the convex hole option. So I'm going to go ahead and click skip to end. And we're also going to leave all the default settings here, except from the Assign NoData dropdown, I'm going to go ahead and select the convex hole. Underneath that, that's automatically going to create this inflate convex hole by field. The units for this field are going to be the units of your data, and a positive number is going to expand the convex hole outward, while a negative number will contract that convex hole. And since this map is in UTMs, if I put a 10 into this field, I would expand the convex hole by 10 meters. Vice versa, if I put a negative 10, we would bring it in by 10 meters. But for the purposes of this example, I'll go ahead and leave it as a 0. And if I go ahead and rename my grid here, and I choose to add it as a existing contour layer to our map so that we can compare it to the original. Go ahead and click finish. And move this below our base. We can see we have a new contour layer that follows the perimeter of our data points. But it does still keep the integrity of your original data. If I was to copy the color scheme by using a copy and paste properties of the original one, you can see that you can not even make out a difference from where those are overlaid. And with this same data set, we're also going to look at assigning NoData using an alpha shape. And since that workflow is very similar, that's why we're doing them both at once here. And an alpha shape is a polygon boundary around a set of selected data points, similar to the convex hole, but you can control the tightness of the polygon around the points by entering an alpha value. The larger the alpha value is, the more convex the polygon around the points will be. The smaller it is, the more concave the polygon around the points will be. And an alpha shape can be created around a set of data points in a base layer, or used to assign NoData directly in the grid data or grid from contours dialog. So let's bring up that grid data dialog again. And we're going to use the same data set and the same default settings so that we can really compare the difference between the two methods. And we'll go ahead and choose alpha shape from the Assign NoData outside of dropdown. And here is that alpha value field that I am talking about. Surfer automatically chose an alpha value of about 4,000, but I'm going to lower it to 2,000 so that we create a more concave shape of our grid. I'll go ahead and rename this one to be our alpha grid. And I'll add this as a contour layer to the same map so we can further compare this. I'll click finish, I'll click OK. And I'll leave this in grayscale so we can really compare those differences. So as we can see, the alpha shape is more concave and the areas assigned NoData are cropped tighter in. It also left this hole in the layer where there are no data points whatsoever. And that has to do with the lower alpha value setting. It crops tighter to our data boundaries. Alpha shapes overall are going to more strictly follow the shape of your entire data set instead of the convex hole being more so the perimeter because of that rubber band example that I gave earlier. And if you want to know exactly what shape your data would be gridded in before going through the gridding process with an alpha shape, there is a way to preview that if your data set has been added as a base map already. To do so, you would expand your base layer and you would select all the points that you want to create an alpha shape around. And I did that with a shift click. Then you would go ahead and click Features, New Features, Alpha Shape. And here I can set my alpha value and click Preview. So if I take a look at the default that Surfer wanted to use, that 4,000, you can see it creates a more convex shape, pretty similar to the convex hole option. But since I lowered it to 2,000, we created this more concave shape, hugs the data, created this hole in the middle. And if I wanted to bring that even lower, you can see we really tightly hug that data. We don't interpolate into any space that there is no data in between it. And both of these methods are great to use if you don't have pre-drawn polygons, but you do have data that you can already add as a base and you want to honor that data. And that is going to wrap up our convex holes and alpha shape sections. We do have one more example to get to. So if you have questions on either of these methods, feel free to send them in now, and I will cover it at the end where I take questions on the other example as well. All right, and for this last example, we are going to be looking at a DEM of the beautiful terrain around Lake Tahoe here. This DEM, though, only has the top surface of the lake. And then we also have a grid that has the subsurface lake data, but it does have some extraneous surface data that doesn't include the terrain that we don't want to use. And so what I'm going to show you how to do is how to assign NoData with the Assign NoData tool, and then replace this surface data of the lake here in this grid with the subsurface data and the bathymetric elevations of this lake. And so as you recall from our earlier examples, we do need some sort of polygon to use as a reference to trim this extra data away from the bathymetric data. And I went ahead and found a SHP file of the lake boundary online that I will go ahead and add to the map to be that polygon we reference. To add the SHP file, I'll click on our lake grid, and then I'll go ahead and click Home, Add to Map, Add Layer, Add Base Layer. And I'll go ahead and grab this Tahoe Lake Boundary SHP file. Click Open. I can kind of make out that we added a little bit of a boundary polygon there. I can increase the line width so it sticks out a little bit more. And then another handy tool that you can use if you're ever presenting data in the 2D plot view and you want to show multiple angles would be here in our map tools section. We have this trackball. And if I use the trackball, I can freely rotate my 3D surface here so that we can really see this polygon boundary and the polygon that we're trying to replace on our terrain. I'm also going to go ahead and add this SHP lake boundary to the terrain file. And the quickest way to do that would be to just right click and duplicate the base layer in the contents window and drag it into the Tahoe terrain surface. Doing that automatically adjusted the Z-scale in a way that I do not want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that by selecting the map in the contents window, clicking scale in the properties, and just using the down arrow on the Z-scale until it looks more similar to that original file. And then I'm going to use the map tools trackball again to set this up so we can look at these maps in the same view. Now I know that this SHP file does have some extra polygon artifacts similar to our second example. And that becomes very clear if I would change the line color to red here on the terrain map. You can see all these extra polygons and polylines over here in the terrain that we're not going to want to use. And we're going to have to clean that up. Otherwise, we're going to assign no data to all those polygons. And the way that we're going to do it for this example is going to be by breaking apart the two layers. We can do that really quickly by clicking from the map tools ribbon here, break apart. And let me move this into our field of view. And that automatically just made this base layer its own separate map. And before I start cleaning this up, or before I use it to assign no data, I'm going to go ahead and rename the layer. And I'm doing that because I know I'm going to use the polygon at some point to assign no data, and there is another duplicate layer in here, so I want to make sure I choose the right one. So I'm just going to call this no data. And you can rename any object in your contents window by just doing a right click, rename object. And so now, instead of trying to click through everything and delete them like I did in the last one, since we know that the Assign NoData dialog has that selected objects only, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and select this large polygon that is just the lake boundary. I did that just by clicking in the map itself I can double check that that is the polygon I want by turning it on and off here in the contents window. And that definitely is. So now my plan is going to be to assign NoData using selected objects only. So make sure we have the polygon still selected here in the contents window. And I'm going to go ahead and click grids, assign NoData. I'll choose our input grid to be the Tahoe Lake elevation, which is this one over here. I'll choose our NoData polygon boundary to be that NoData that we renamed. And I'll click selected objects only. And I'll rename this our NoData Lake. I'm going to go ahead and add it as a brand new 3D surface. Oh, and I forgot to set the NoData method again, but here we're going to choose NoData outside because we're trying to cut away all this blue surface that is going to be replaced by our terrain. All right, and that created a 3D model of just the subsurface bathymetric Tahoe Lake elevations. And now our next step is going to be to use the grid mosaic tool to combine it with our terrain grid here. The grid mosaic tool combines two or more grids into one, and it's found here on the grids toolbar, resize mosaic. Once I click that, I'll be prompted to open up as many grids as I feel like, and I can use Control and click to select our Tahoe terrain grid and our NoData Lake. If you were trying to combine like 20 grids at once, you could do that now. You could Control click them all if you wanted to, do a Shift click. Just do know that if you select so many grids at once, it may take a long time to grid them all, combine them, if they're all really large data files. So I'll go ahead and click open. And that'll bring us into the grid mosaic dialog. And then I will see here in the grid extents preview, I will see what the two grids I selected look like. The gray grid is that 3D surface of just the lake that we just made. And the red grid is our original terrain map. We then have some options to choose how we overlap those two grids. Some options, such as the average or the sum, are good if you're combining something such as two LiDAR tiles that may have a seam of missing data between them. But we are going to either use the first or last option, depending on the order of our input grids. Choosing first or last means that whichever grid is first or last in this list will entirely replace the data of the other one. So I'll drag the name over so I can see which grids are last. And I'm going to choose last because I want the NoData Lake grid to entirely replace that surface that's not showing anything on the terrain grid. Once that is set, I can give our final grid a name, and I'll call this Tahoe Final. I'll click Save, and I'll add this as a new 3D surface. And then I'll go ahead and turn everything else off so we can take a look at that final model we just made. So we can pretty well see from here that that lake data is definitely in there. But let's say I wanted to show my final model to a client. The best way to do that for a 3D map, and you can do this for any grid-based map in Surfer as well, would be to enter the 3D view. There's a lot of ways you can do that, but I'll go ahead and right-click 3D view. And that puts us in this fully 3D trackball view. where I can take a good look at that nice terrain and the lake data we added. I could also reduce the vertical exaggeration so it's back closer to that original model like I like. And as you can see, we've got that lake data that extends down to here. And that is going to be our final example where we replace grid data with a different grid to make a 3D lake surface. And that's going to go ahead and conclude the presentation for today. I'll go ahead and take some questions now, but before I get to that, just know that later this week, we are going to be sending each of you the recording of the webinar and the data used so you can follow along at your own pace or send it to a friend. Also, if you are one of our users who also uses Grapher, there is a new version being released in about 2 weeks here that's going to have some exciting new features like multiple axes breaks and inverse axes. So be on the lookout for the message within your Grapher app to update to the latest version if you have active maintenance. And now I'll go ahead and get to some of these questions we have now. All right, one question I'm seeing goes back to our alpha value, our alpha shape examples. And it is, does the alpha value have a dimensional meaning, such as a search radius? And we can send you some in-depth reading on that, but as a summary, the alpha value defines the radius of the circles that are created by the edges of the triangulation of your data points, and the units are in the units of your layer. And so the alpha shape depends on both data density and the alpha value, and it's never going to extend past the points. Another question I am seeing here is if you had bore wells that you wanted to display in 3D, you would need Voxler to display them. Actually, in versions of Surfer above, I want to say 21, we did add in a new drill hole map type. So you can do a 3D view of boreholes and you can stack surfaces onto them. There are certain things that only Voxler can do, but if you are just looking to display them, then you could do that in Surfer, and you could add things such as contour layers, post layers, and things of that nature. And that was actually version 22 that we brought it in, not version 21. Another question I'm seeing is, can we use the minimum option instead of the last? For the example we just did, we could have done minimum because you are correct. We were adding in the lower lake elevation, so we could have done minimum. You have to really understand your data when doing the mosaic if you're going to go with that option instead of the last, just in case for whatever reason there may be some extraneous data that could get lost if you went with minimum instead of last. But for this example, we definitely could have. And one more question I'm seeing here: which resample method is recommended for continuous data when mosaicing? And I would say that the method used it really depends on the data itself. If I could open that up again. I'll just choose 2 random ones here. With continuous data, it does depend on the data itself, but I would probably go with average. But it also may be necessary to do a couple tests to see what brings out the best option. so long as your data isn't massive, it's only a couple extra seconds to make 2 different grids, and you can look at whichever one you like best. All right, and I don't see any more open questions. So if you have any that you are dying to get out, throw them out here now. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap this up as people start rolling out. Thank you again for attending, everybody. I hope you all learned something, and I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you guys are at.